At this point, I've showed you how to share values from page to page in a couple different ways. First, we took a look at using the query string. We could have anchor tags that link, and then we add key value pairs to the query string, and then we're able to send that information to other pages. We also took a look at using the post superglobal. In this lesson, though, I'm going to show you how you can use sessions, which generally we use to store user-specific data. So to give you an example of how it works sort of at a higher level is sessions are stored on the server. And so what happens is that the PHP engine will actually set this cookie, and I'll teach you about cookies shortly. For now, just accept that it's a way to store little bits of information on the client. So it will set a cookie and it will store what's known as a session ID, which is this really long string that you could never guess. It's randomly generated. So then when the user requests a specific URL on your website, that session ID cookie that we set, well, that will be sent back to the server, at which point the PHP engine will validate it and then subsequently retrieve the data that's associated with that specific session. So that sounds confusing. Why don't we just jump in and I'll show you how to use it. I've created a new folder called sessions and an index.php. So the first step when we are working with sessions is to run this function called session start, like this, session start. Now it's important that this occurs before any HTML is echoed out, and that's because this function will actually set some headers. So if you already have some HTML and then you run session start, you're going to get an error. Generally, you'll do this at the very top of the page. So if you want the simplified version, just think session start means we're going to start a new session. We want to work with sessions, we need to start that up. The longer form is that when you call this function, this is where that session ID string is generated and where the cookie is created on the client. So now at this point, we can add information to the session superglobal. So try this out, $_session, and we're going to set a value of username, and we'll set that to my username, like so. All right, so now that we've started up session, we've added this new key username and made it equal to Jeffrey Way. So then at this point, if we were to link to about.php, and let's go ahead and create that now, about.php, once again, I need to start up session. So we'll do it like that, but then I can echo session username, and let's see what we get. So I will begin by viewing this in the browser. And now when I load this page, we're not going to see anything because all we did was set a value in our session superglobal. But now let's go to about.php, and if everything worked correctly, now this value, which we set within index.php, is now available within about.php. But now there will also be times when you want to destroy a session, and this is so you can clean up any memory leaks, anything like that. So we can also do session destroy. Think of a session as a user-specific lifecycle. You open the browser, you visit a web page, you close the browser. That was a session. Now, if you were to visit our website and then you closed the browser and reopened it, the session would automatically be destroyed. But there's other times when you want to have a little bit more control, and this is why we use session destroy. Think about logging out of some sort of web app. Well, you could have a session running that had information maybe about their username and stuff like that. Well, when they log out, you want to destroy that session. You don't want to wait until they have closed their browser and reopened it. And that's why we use session destroy. So when we call this function, what's going to happen is it's going to erase all of the session data from the disk. However, the information is still stored within the session superglobal, and I'll prove it to you if we print our session. Let's try this out. I'm going to come back, reload about.php, and note that we echoed out the username, and then if I come back, you'll see we destroyed the session, but then we ran print r on the superglobal, and it's still there. So you also might find it advantageous to reinitialize the session superglobal, and you can do that by doing this, session equals an array. Or if you're using PHP 5.4, you could do that. But for now, we'll stick with the old version. Now, when I come back and I reload the page, we're not going to get Jeff Way at all, because remember, we destroyed the session. So then we restarted it, but we have to go back to index.php where we actually set the value. So we'll do that now. That sets the value. Now we go to about.php, and now we have Jeffrey Way. We destroyed the session. We reinitialized the superglobal to get rid of any data that's associated with it. And now we just get this empty array that's echoed out. Good. Now, technically, one last thing you would have to do that we're not going to cover, at least just yet, is take the cookie that exists. Remember, I noted that a cookie was created when you're using sessions, and you would want to delete that. But I want to save that for the cookies lesson. So for now, just accept that it's something you might consider. So now that we know how it works, let's take a look at an actual real-world example. So let's say that we want to give a user the ability to log in. And we're not going to add the database logic just yet, but we'll hard code this information in. So I'm going to create a new file called login.php, and I will delete these other ones. And for now, we will just add some HTML. And the first step, of course, is I need to allow the user to log in. So we'll do this right now. We'll add a form. The action is going to be to itself, so we can hard code that in or leave it blank. And the method is going to be post because remember, we're dealing with sensitive information. We want to use post. Okay, so now we need to add our first form element, and this will be for the username. We'll set that accordingly. And then we'll do one more, and this will be for the password. The final step will be to have a submit button. So we'll get rid of all of that, and we'll do input type equals submit, value equals login. The final step is because I am working with an unordered list, I need to make sure that I wrap this accordingly. There we go. So now I'm going to save this, and we're going to come back and go to login.php, and we get our login form. All right, so now we have the username, we have the password, we have the button. When we click the button, it's going to post to itself. So now let's write the logic, and we can do it at the top for now. And the first step is to determine whether the form has been posted. And you will remember from the last lesson that we can do that by saying if server request method equals post, then we know that the form has been posted. And for now, we can just echo posted just for the example. I'll click login, and now we get posted. Okay, good. Another way would be to set a name on the submit button, like this, name login form. And then you could say, if we remove all of this, you could also say if is set post login form, then echo posted. Let's try it one more time. I click login, and we're going to get the same thing. Now, the advantage to this sometimes is, what if you have multiple forms on the page? Well, in that case, this method alone won't give you any idea as to what specifically was posted. But this one does, because if this form alone was posted, then we should have access to that submit button's key. Otherwise, we won't. But for now, when we have only one login or form on the page, I think this is a little bit more readable, so that's what we will do. So at this point, we know that we can grab the username. For example, I could do username equals post username. And if I echo username, one more time, we'll set username. And if I run it, yep, now we can get those values. So we could set username and password equals post password. Now that we have these values, we need to figure out how could you go about logging a person in? Well, the first step would be get their values, right? The second step would be validate that against the records. And in a real-world application, this would mean take the username and password they provide and determine whether that set of values exists within the database or whether that user actually has an account. And if it does, then go ahead and log them in and set a session. Login plus set session. So we have these three values. Now the second step, validate that against the records. We're not working with a database just yet, so we're going to hard code this in. So I'm going to use something new you haven't tried yet, define, and this is how we can create constants. And you can think of constants as values that never change. So think about maybe you have a calculator and you have the tax rate. Well, that tax rate presumably will never change. It's not a variable, it's a constant. And we can create constants in PHP using define. So in this case, we'll do define username, and I'm going to set my username to my email address. This is fairly common. And next, we're going to do password. And we'll set this password to 1234. Now, I don't want you to use this in your actual projects. This is just for now. And I'll make a note, just for now. Later, you'll learn how to use databases to store this information. All right, so now we've stored these values. The next step, validate that against the records. Well, we could say if username equals username. Notice that when we reference constants, we're not doing anything like this. We reference it using all caps. And this is generally a convention. You make your constants all caps, so it's very clear that you intended for that to be a constant. So now we're checking if what the user set to the username inbox equals what we have stored, and the same is true for the password, then the credentials are correct. And at this point, we can log them in and set the session. So because we are working with sessions, we go to the top and set session start. There we go. We will begin by storing their username. So we'll say session username equals username. So now we have stored within the session this key called username, and that will be equal to, in this case, Jeffrey@Envato.com. And now we can pass that value from page to page. Now in this case, why don't we actually change it from my email to something a little more friendly, like Jeffrey Way. Now that we've set this key, and that's all we need in this case, we're going to redirect them to maybe some private page like admin.php. And we can redirect with PHP using headers. So I can set right here header, and what is the location? The location is going to be admin.php. Now we haven't created that just yet, so we'll do admin.php, and we'll say secret admin section. Okay, that's fine for now. Let's try this out. We're going to log in, Jeffrey Way. I'm going to use all the correct permissions. Notice that I've set in a regular input for the password, but I should change that, shouldn't I? We should make this a password field. Okay, one more time, Jeffrey Way, 1, 2, 3, 4. I log in, and notice it set the session and it sent me to admin.php. So now we should have access to the username. And we'll try this out, admin.php. Within an h1 tag, we could say hello, PHP, echo, session username. Like that. Reload the page, and notice that we're getting this undefined variable. And this happens to you. Remember, we have this value, but you have to run session start at the top before anything else is displayed on the page. And again, that's because we're setting these headers. So for example, if I were to set it right here, watch what happens. Of course, you get the undefined variable, but you also get this warning, cannot set session cache limiter. The headers have already been sent. So if you get headers already sent, you need to place that code at the very top. There we go. That looks better. So now we have hello, Jeffrey Way. We also need a logout page, so let's do logout.php. And when somebody accesses this page, we're simply going to run session destroy. We'll also put this on its own line, and we will reinitialize the session superglobal to an array. And also, in a future lesson, you would want to delete the cookie. And I'll add a note for next lesson. All right, so now when somebody visits this page, we destroy the session, we reinitialize it, and now we're going to header, location, back to login.php. This all looks good, and of course, because we are working with sessions, I need to run, once again, session start. We're going to start working with sessions, and all we're going to do here is destroy the session, reinitialize it, and redirect to login.php. So we have admin.php. If we go to logout, we've now been logged out, and we know that because if I go back to admin, first, do note that it does allow us to view this page, but the username key is not available. So that means within admin.php, we need some way to specify that they should only be able to view this page if they've been logged in. And in this case, for now, why don't we do this? If is set session username, that should be enough for now. We're checking to see if the username has been set, and we set it when they logged in. So if it's not set, then they probably shouldn't be here. And that should be okay for a first step. So let's open up this block, and you know what? Why don't we say if it has not been set? In that case, let's redirect them back to login.php, like that. Now if I run it, nope, we have not been logged in, so it won't even allow me to load that page. Notice I go to admin, and it redirects me. But now, if we set some invalid credentials, we reload the page, that's just going to reload the login form. Now, what you might possibly want to do is add some logic at the top where you can say, if this fails, then otherwise, maybe you could set a status. So you could say status, incorrect, login credentials, like that. And then somewhere within your form, maybe right here, PHP if is set status. In that case, and I'm going to use this shorthand syntax, we will echo out the paragraph tag, like so. Now remember, if you're using PHP 5.4, you can also do this shorthand and get rid of the echo. I'm trying not to do that because so many of you will not be using 5.4, but you still have that option, and that's perfectly okay to use as of 5.4. All right, so let's try this again. We will use the incorrect information, login. We get incorrect login details, good. Now if we use the correct information, 1, 2, 3, 4, login, now we are on our secret page. Everything looks good. Let's go ahead and to admin.php, maybe right here, we'll just add an anchor tag that directs to logout.php, and we'll say logout. There we go. So now we're logged in. This is where we have the private information related to that user. And if I click logout, we're logged out. We can no longer go back to admin.php, as we can see right there. And this is a very basic, but the first step into how you would set up some sort of membership system. You would consider this the first step of the ladder in terms of worrying about security, making things flexible and reusable. So that'll do it for this lesson. Let's just take a look at the final code, which we can certainly improve. Is we set session start, we set our constants just for now, then we determine whether that login form was posted. If it was, we get the values that they entered, and we determine whether they are equal to what we have set as the constants. If they are, that means the information was correct, so we store the username within the session, and we relocate to the private admin.php. When we are within that admin file, we determine, is that username available in the session? If it's not, they haven't logged in. So if it's not, we need to redirect back to login.php, and we should also die so that nothing else is executed. Then, when the user logs out, all we do is we start up the session, we destroy it, we reinitialize the session array, and we redirect the user back to login.php. Now, a couple of things. We've gone a procedural route here, but I want you to start thinking about creating reusable bits of code. So in this case, it's all just step by step. First do this, then do this, then do that. But think about this. This is something that could probably be abstracted away to a function. Maybe this function could be called validate user, where the function accepts the username and password, and it validates that against what's stored within these two constants here. And that way, when you store it within a function, you can call that anytime you need to within your project. All right, that's going to do it for this lesson. If you have any questions, visit the tutsplus.com forums. My name is Jeffrey Way, and I will see you in the next lesson.